There is no draft of prose describing the mass of humanity that made its way to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and well beyond the great emancipator on that day. No metaphor that has slipped through the cracks, waiting to be discovered, dusted off, and injected into the discourse of half a century later. The March on Washington had been compared to a societal shockwave, a wall of humanity, a living monument, a human mosaic, an outright miracle. The size of the crowd, as you had seen, was truly staggering for its time. Later estimates varied widely, depending on the agenda of who was keeping count, but they ranged from 250 to 300,000. It was evident that some showed up to draw strength from the movement and strength from the speakers and from one another, while some showed up as evidence of a sense of solidarity, and others were said to have showed up out of sheer curiosity. This was a time when strength in numbers was as important as ever and evident, as it allowed individuals to say and see that they were not alone in their suffering. It allowed many who had suffered the degradations of discrimination and sometimes physical abuse in relative isolation to share with the vast multitude their pain as well as hope and optimism for what would eventually become a better day. The March on Washington for civil rights and for freedom had been called an ocean of humanity. Now, unquestionably, that was so. And where there is an ocean, there is also a tide. And where there is a tide, there may also come a tidal wave. And in this tidal wave also came a tsunami. One of the more interesting and little-known facts of the historic 1963 March on Washington was the fact that that seed of nonviolent mass demonstration was not planted nor originally germinated in the soil of the civil rights movement. Considering its colossal significance, the march was not actually the brainchild of any of the civil rights leaders at all, nor even an idea born of the 1960s. For more than a generation earlier, 1941, the African-American president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, a distinguished man by the name of A. Philip Randolph, had conceived of the idea of what was to be the original March on Washington as a way to pressure then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt into ensuring Negroes had jobs in the ever more bustling American economy. Amongst many historians, A. Philip Randolph was widely acknowledged as the ideological godfather of the 1963 March on Washington for civil rights and freedom. And he caused America to awaken to a new day of justice. Randolph's proposed mass demonstration was a serious and well-organized affair. And in fact, the looming threat of that event was enough pressure for the president. FDR was able to negotiate the march's cancellation with Randolph at nearly the last moment, only by giving in. Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued one of America's first presidential executive orders protecting African-American rights in the modern era. It was only the second time that such an order had been given in our country's history. The first had been Abraham Lincoln and its Emancipation Proclamation. Ironically, the 150th anniversary we are celebrating this month as well. The fact that Martin Luther King Jr. decided to have a March on Washington culminate at the Lincoln Memorial, nor the fact that his historic speech resoundingly echoed with the tone and tenor of one of President Lincoln's famous metaphors was not by chance nor happenstance, not at all. Martin had a mission to attempt to resurrect the persona of that dead president when he stood below his image and said, quote, 50 years ago, a great American in whom symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation, unquote. As infamously famous as the words of Martin's I Have a Dream speech have become, it really has been reported that even on the evening of August 27th, 1963, the day before he was to give the most important speech of his career, Martin Luther King Jr. was still struggling and rewriting its drafts. In fact, it had been said that he really was quite undecided about the message that he wanted to deliver that day. We who are here today have been privy to but a microcosm of the many events that occurred on that day. Martin Luther King Jr. was scheduled to be the final speaker of the day of long speeches, lectures, and speeches in song that would take place on that day. And the day before, he struggled with the content of his message that would bellow in the hollow halls of the Lincoln Memorial. In fact, the I Have a Dream quotes from that speech were never actually written in the speech until well after it was delivered. In the haste of limited time, Martin had finalized his speech of the March on Washington in the very last hours of the evening of the night before. It was a combination of some things, old parts of speeches he had delivered with a steady cadence on various other occasions, and some things new intending to invoke the memory of President Abraham Lincoln as the great emancipator. Apparently, it was going relatively well when a voice from behind him cried out, "Martin, tell them about the dream." That cry came from none other than the traditional gospel singer Mahalia Jackson. Now, for some of you who may not be familiar with that name, Mahalia Jackson was the African-American Kate Smith of traditional gospel music. And if we have any younger members in the audience, then I will simply ask you to reference Adele. All those saints had a physical stature and build that was just about the same. They had an enormous lung capacity. There was no one who could sing God Bless America quite like Kate Smith, and there was no one who could bring alive the spirit of traditional gospel music of her era like the much-beloved Mahalia Jackson. Now, when a voice as powerful as Mahalia Jackson's yelled something at you, it wasn't like Martin could possibly ignore the call. Some have given that moment great biblical metaphors, and some who were actually there and present at the time indeed said that at that moment there was a transfiguration that occurred in Martin Luther King Jr. But the fact remains that that part of the speech was not a part of Martin's final draft. If you look at his delivery again and very closely the next time, you will see, as I did, that Martin Luther King Jr. was no longer referring to his written notes. He leaned his head back and then to the side and seemed to be having a conversation with God himself. Strange things happen when men begin to talk to God, and even stranger still when God starts talking right back. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, "Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow," unquote, yes, the difficult days following the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, yes, the difficult days following the shootings in Aurora, yes, the difficult days following Columbine, yes, the difficult days following Virginia Tech, yes, these difficult days following Sandy Hook, may we finally come to the realization that we are more alike than different, as we are all simply human. Martin Luther King Jr. challenges us to possess a character of excellence And with that, you too can rise to the highest office in the land. Let me leave you with something first drafted by the Saint Mother Teresa. Quote, people are often unreasonable, irrational, self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives, but be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies, but succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you, but be honest and sincere anyway. What you can spend years creating, others can destroy overnight, but create it anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous, but be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten, but be good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough, but give your best anyway in the final analysis. It's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway, unquote. Martin's dream may not yet be completely realized in its fullest capacity, but the dream he shared with us in 1963 is still our dream today as we stand at the precipice of the year 2013. In fact, it's all of America's dream. If the question is, have we completely eradicated racism and sexism and prejudice from the cultural divide of America, then the answer is an unequivocal no. But we have, most assuredly, been catapulted by this dreamer well beyond where we ever were before as a country and as a people. And it has been with and through the collective efforts of us all. No, we will never turn back no more. The poet Langston Hughes said it best, yes, I too sing America. Thank you.